We'll be watching them. That does it for me tonight. The Last Word starts right now with Jonathan Capehart in for Lawrence. Hey, Jonathan.
Hey, Jen. Roy Cooper's a badass. I mean, the Democratic governor who was able to expand Medicaid in his state with a Republican legislature. I mean, come on.
And one of their attacks was that he expanded Medicaid, it seems, and that he has a North Carolina accent, I suppose. I don't know. A little weak soup there. But yes, he's a badass. I'm sure he'd love that.
I wonder if he's watching. Call me, Senator. Jen, thank you very much.
Call Jonathan. He's available. Have a great show.
Thank you, Jen. Donald Trump is gaslighting the American people. That's what Joe Rogan said about the Trump administration's Epstein problem. They're trying to gaslight you. But it's actually Trump's modus operandi on everything. Untethered to the truth, Trump just says stuff in the hopes of willing it into existence. Remember his wild promises to lower prices and end the war in Ukraine on day one? Now Trump is running the same playbook and essentially asking people not to believe their own eyes. Today, Donald Trump tried to paint a rosy picture of the U.S. economy, touting a GDP report that showed the economy growing at 3% in the second quarter.
We smashed all expectations. They thought it would be maybe a little bit less than 2, and it was 3, a little bit more than 3. Consumer spending is up. Business investment is way up. Domestic manufacturing is way up. Real disposable family income is up, and personal savings are up. This is truly the dawn of the golden age of America.
The golden age of America. That top-line growth number sounds good until you look under the hood. The New York Times reports economic growth softened in the first half of the year as tariffs and uncertainty upended business plans and scrambled consumers' spending decisions. Many forecasters expect a further deterioration in the months ahead as tariffs work their way through the supply chains, federal job cuts filter through the economy, and stricter immigration policies take a toll on industries that rely on foreign-born workers. The Wall Street Journal editorial board dubbed it the weirdest GDP report ever. If you think President Trump's tariff ructions don't affect the economy, take a gander at Wednesday's report for second quarter gross domestic product. The economy grew 3% on an annual basis, but largely because imports collapsed. There's no recession signal in the second quarter numbers, but there's no boom either. Things could only get worse in 3 days when Donald Trump's delayed tariff deadline, postponed from April 9th, is supposed to take effect, which Donald Trump is claiming will be a, quote, great day for America. But Americans have soured on Donald Trump's economic policies, with 60% disapproving of his handling of the economy. 62% believe Donald Trump's policies are making food and groceries more expensive. Even in a Fox News poll, 62% disapprove of Trump's tariffs and his handling of inflation. Despite those numbers, Donald Trump posted today, quote, "The August 1st deadline is the August 1st deadline. It stands strong and will not be extended. A big day for America." In other words, no taco. We'll see if Trump always chickens out, or taco, as it's come to be known, on Friday. Donald Trump touted deals that aren't actually deals in the White House today.
The Japan deal is done. Many of the other deals are done. We're now negotiating with various other countries, and the rest we're just sending out the bill to. We send a bill, we send a letter saying that you'll pay a certain tariff.
But as ABC News reports, quote, "The trade agreement with the European Union, for instance, lowers the tariff rate on European products to 15%, putting it below the threatened rate of 30%, but higher than a universal rate of 10% faced by nearly all imports. Similarly, the accord with Japan lowers tariffs on such imports from a threatened rate of 25% to 15%. So, American consumers will still be facing higher costs even from countries Donald Trump claimed to make a deal with. And remember this one fact: none of this is legal, since these deals haven't been approved by Congress, a fact currently being litigated in court. All of this is why the Federal Reserve decided once again not to lower interest rates today, despite pressure from Donald Trump. And when it comes to Jeffrey Epstein, the convicted sex trafficker who Donald Trump once called a, quote, terrific guy, once again, Trump wants you to think nothing to see here. Overnight, Trump's Justice Department filed a motion explaining to a judge why they want to unseal the grand jury transcripts in Jeffrey Epstein's and Ghislaine Maxwell's criminal cases, citing a broad public interest in the underlying proceedings. NBC News reports, quote, the DOJ addressed secrecy concerns because of personal identifying information contained in grand jury transcripts. While there is broad agreement that victims' information should be kept private, the Justice Department has also pushed for redacting information related to people who have not been charged with crimes. And the Washington Post reports today, quote, the grand jury transcripts the Justice Department is seeking to make public from its investigation of disgraced financier and sex offender Jeffrey Epstein and his associate, Ghislaine Maxwell, include testimony from only 2 witnesses, both of them law enforcement officers, government lawyers said. That will likely not be good enough to satisfy Trump's MAGA supporters yelling for transparency. New polling shows 58% of voters disapprove of the way the Trump administration is handling the Epstein files. Only 16% approve. And across the board, wide majorities support releasing all files from the Epstein case, including 82% of Republicans. Let me say that again. 83% of Republicans and 82% of MAGA Republicans. And 61% think the Epstein files contain embarrassing information about Trump. Today, Senate Democrats took another step toward trying to force the Trump administration to release the Epstein files. Democratic leader Chuck Schumer led all 7 senators on the Homeland Security Committee in invoking a rarely used law to compel the Justice Department to release the Epstein files. The New York Times reports, under a section of federal law commonly referred to in the Senate as the Rule of 5, government agencies are required to provide relevant information if any 5 members of the Homeland Security Committee request it. Here is what Leader Schumer said today.
This is not complicated. After promising full transparency for years, every single time Trump, his administration, Republican leaders have had a chance to be transparent about the Epstein files, they've chosen to hide. The evasions, the delays, the excuses, they are not just odd, they're alarming. It begs the question, if there's nothing to hide, why all the evasiveness? It's not a stunt, it's not symbolic, it's a formal exercise of congressional power under federal law. And we expect an answer from DOJ by August the 15th.
Even some Republicans are admitting that Donald Trump's efforts to distract away from the Epstein files may not be enough.
American people want to know, and they're entitled to know, who, if anyone, he trafficked these women to. And if there were such people, such men, then why weren't they prosecuted? I think we're beyond the point where they can say, look, trust me, there's nobody else. I think now the American people want to see receipts. And I want to give them plenty of time, a reasonable amount of time, and I think Congress should too, to decide how they're going to answer that question. But I think they're going to have to answer, and they should.
Joining us now, Harry Litman, former U.S. Attorney and former Deputy Assistant Attorney General. He is also host of the Talking Feds podcast. Harry, thanks for being here. What can you tell us about this move by the Democrats, and what happens if Trump refuses?
Well, I think we will find that out, Jonathan, because I think they will refuse. It is in the law. What Schumer is saying is accurate, the so-called rule of five, but it's specifically for minority members of the law. Here, all 7 Democratic members of the Homeland Security and Governmental Affairs Committee. And it hasn't really been tested in the court. What you're going to hear, this gets arcane, but you're going to hear the administration saying, oh, this is a political dispute. Courts, you may not resolve this. Or maybe they will say these individual members don't have standing to bring it, even though that's what the law says. So the law does say it. It's only been used a few times, and the last couple times it's been used have had just those sorts of disputes, and then the dispute kind of died because the administration and Congress would negotiate, as normally happens after a subpoena, but does not seem very likely here. Administration does not play by those normal rules.
Mm-hmm. You know, Harry, Virginia Giuffre's family put out a statement contradicting what Trump said yesterday, that Epstein, quote unquote, stole her from the spa at Mar-a-Lago. And a quote from the statement: "We would like to clarify that it was convicted sex trafficker Ghislaine Maxwell who targeted and preyed upon our then 16-year-old sister, Virginia, from Mar-a-Lago, where she was working in 2000, several years before Epstein and President Trump had their falling out. It was shocking to hear President Trump invoke our sister and say that he was aware that Virginia had been stolen from Mar-a-Lago. It makes us ask if he was aware of Jeffrey Epstein and Ghislaine Maxwell's criminal actions, especially given his statement 2 years later that his good friend Jeffrey, quote, likes women on the younger side." Harry, your reaction to this statement?
Yeah, look, that's exactly right. The timeline isn't in doubt. Trump tried to sort of finesse it, but it is clear that when she was a 16-year-old working at Mar-a-Lago, not a very good look, by the way, for Mar-a-Lago and Trump, it was Maxwell who preyed on her, zeroed in on her, and said, oh, you come this way, you're going to be Jeffrey Epstein's traveling masseuse, which she was for 2 years. She was one of the more notorious and tragic victims, Jonathan, including alleging she was forced to have sex with Prince Andrew. But really, it, to me, makes it seem as if they are running in at least similar circles. And for sure, that when Trump says that's the reason he banned Epstein, it just doesn't fly with the time. 2 years later, he's saying, as you said, 1 year after that, he's writing the letter. It seems certain that the Wall Street Journal publicized. So it really doesn't hold up to the facts even a little.
Mm-hmm. The Supreme Court will meet on September 29th to discuss. I'm sorry, I'm getting something in my ear that I can't quite hear. But let me ask you this question if I get it. Right. It's not breaking news, but let me ask you this question. The Supreme Court will meet on September 29th to discuss several petitions, including Ghislaine Maxwell's appeal. What do you think might come from that?
Not a lot. It's a cert petition, and it's pretty routine, and it was given quick work by the Court of Appeals. It's just the last stop in the road. And she has said, by the way, trying to negotiate or maybe just refuse by granting conditions that she doesn't want to testify until that's over. And then she brings another habeas case that could be years. She also wants to see all the questions, also wants to have immunity. That's either her way of saying no, unless I'm going to take the Fifth Amendment, or a sort of opening bid that the Congress has already made clear they're not going to take. No immunity for convicted sex offender Ghislaine Maxwell. Mm-hmm.
Harry Litman, thank you for coming back to The Last Word. And just want to note for the viewers that NBC News has not confirmed the Trump letter story that's been reported by the Wall Street Journal. Joining us now is Heather Long, chief economist at Navy Federal, my former colleague at the Washington Post. It's been a long time since I've seen you. Thank you for coming to The Last Word. Help us understand this GDP report that appears good on the surface. What are the underlying concerns about the economy?
Yeah, I think the Wall Street Journal got it right when they called it one very weird report. That headline figure, 3%, obviously looks pretty darn good. But as you said, when you look under the surface, so much of that 3% growth was driven by the fact that companies just stopped importing in April and May. You know, those tariffs went into effect. It was a very confusing time. And most companies just kind of threw up their hands and said, don't bring anything in right now. And so that artificially boosted growth. As many of your viewers will know, the key to the US economy is what is the consumer doing? You know, what are people still out there buying or not? And that's the key number. And that came in at 1.4%. So not a recession. This is a growing economy, but that is a much lower number than what we have been used to. Last year, that figure was close to 3% in 2023, 2024. So you can see the slowdown.
A Ford earnings report said the company has paid $800 million in tariffs last quarter. Today, Jerome Powell said this. Listen to this.
Higher tariffs have begun to show through more clearly to prices of some goods, but their overall effects on economic activity and inflation remain to be seen.
That can't be comforting with consumers staring down back to school and the holiday season.
Consumers are obviously very nervous about this, particularly middle class and moderate income consumers. We see that at our own Navy Federal Credit Union from our members. A lot of people are holding more money right now in their checking account out of nerves. So what's going on overall? We're going to get another read on inflation first thing tomorrow morning. That is expected to go a little bit higher. But so far, companies, including Ford that you referenced, are mostly eating those costs. And that's why Ford reported, you know, its profits were way down. And because they are having to eat these higher costs right now, they are not able to pass them along to consumers. What we're seeing in our credit union is a huge rush of people going into used cars. They can't afford, you know, the average car price right now is almost $50,000. There's just not a lot of people who can afford that right now.
Heather, explain something to me. That you said that Ford is eating those costs because they can't pass them along to the consumer. Why is that? I thought that companies did that just automatically. Hey, prices have gone up on our materials. We'll just pass that on to the consumer.
Yes, you're right. That's ultimately the goal. And that's what they like to do. They can't eat those costs forever. But right now, demand really nosedived for cars. You may remember there was a huge spike in March. Everyone was trying to buy their car before the tariffs came into effect. But we've seen a pretty big slump in car sales and truck sales this spring and early summer. As I was referencing at Navy Federal Credit Union, we've seen people rushing into used cars. So if they're going to buy anything, they're just automatically going to the used car lot. And so that's why the companies like Ford, Stellantis, Chrysler, they're all struggling a little bit right now to pass the full cost on. Some people, Jonathan, are calling it sneakflation, the idea that these costs will be passed along, but they're going to try to sneak it in over time so people don't notice as much.
Speaking of sneak, I'm going to sneak in one more question. Heather, what do you think the likelihood is that Trump chickens out and delays tariffs again on Friday?
Well, I don't know if it'll happen exactly on Friday, but the reality is so far every trade truce, trade agreement, trade framework, whatever you want to call these, has been lower than expected. So there has been, I don't know if you want to call it chickening out or bargaining or what, but there has ultimately been some pullback. So if it doesn't happen on August 1st, I do anticipate that it will happen in the coming weeks where we see a pullback from those worst case scenarios.
Heather Long, great to see you. Thank you very much for coming back to The Last Word.
Thank you. Take care.
And coming up, Donald Trump and Republicans are already scheming ways to maintain control of Congress in the midterm elections. One way is through gerrymandering districts in Texas to make Democrats fight for control of their seats. Our next guest, Congresswoman Julie Johnson, is one Democrat who would be impacted by a new GOP district map if it passed. And that's next. Donald Trump knows that Republican control of Congress is in serious jeopardy next fall, so he and his fellow Republicans are already scheming a way to maintain power. The Texas Tribune reports Texas GOP lawmakers released their first draft of the state's new congressional map Wednesday, proposing revamped district lines that attempt to flip 5 Democratic seats in next year's midterm elections. This unusual mid-decade redistricting comes after a pressure campaign waged by President Donald Trump's political team in the hopes of padding Republicans' narrow majority in the U.S. House. Right now, Texas Republicans hold 25 of the state's 38 House seats. The Texas GOP's new map would target 5 districts currently held by Democrats, moving the lines so that 30 of Texas' 38 districts would have voted for Trump in the 2024 presidential election. Now, gerrymandering is nothing new. Both parties do it, but it's the timing and nature of this Texas redistricting which shows just how brazen Donald Trump and the Republicans are being with this gambit. Here is the Democratic vice chair of the Texas Congressional Redistricting Committee during their meeting earlier this week.
Mid-decade redistricting is unusual. It's unnecessary. We are required to redraw the district boundaries every 10 years following the census, but that's not what this is, y'all. This right here is a racist attack on congressional districts of color. It's about taking power away from black and brown communities. It's about erasing your voices. This effort to change the districts, again, has nothing to do with representing people better. It's the opposite of that. It's a power grab at the expense of black and brown communities.
If this proposed map passes the Republican-controlled Texas legislature, several Democrats will be fighting to save their seats in Congress. NBC News reports the lines in the newly proposed maps cut into the South Texas congressional districts currently held by Democratic Congressman Henry Cuellar and Vicente Gonzalez, the Dallas area district held by Congresswoman Julie Johnson, and Houston area district held by Congressman Al Green. The newly proposed lines also effectively combined the Austin area districts held by Democratic Congressman Greg Casar and Lloyd Doggett. Joining us now is Democratic Congressman Julie Johnson of Texas. She is a member of House Foreign Affairs, Homeland Security, and Administration Committees. Congresswoman, as I just mentioned, your district is one of those that would be changed if this congressional map is passed. What was your reaction when you saw it for the first time?
It's just an outrageous, racist partisan grab on the voters of the state of Texas. If you look at my congressional seat, for example, Texas 32, it's currently contained predominantly within the boundaries of Dallas County. It basically cuts the top sliver off and takes it across 6 counties almost to the Louisiana-Texas line, over 200 miles, to be able to disenfranchise voters of color in my district. And they dismantled Tarrant County as well, really piecing it apart. And then Austin, it's the most ridiculous thing. It takes downtown Austin and pairs it almost as far east as my district goes.
Democrats in the state legislature are threatening to flee the state as a way to prevent this map from being adopted. A similar tactic failed when Texas Democrats tried to block a Republican voting law in 2021. Can Texas state Democrats stop this map before the 2026 election?
Well, they certainly have a lot of tools at their disposal. I was in the Texas legislature before coming to Congress, and a lot of them are my dear friends, and I fought with them on a last quorum break. So I understand what's involved in that, and they can absolutely do it. They can certainly delay these maps, but they have other tools as well. They can try to amend the maps and debate the maps and do other things. But we also have national pressure to bear. California can absolutely redistrict their maps. There's maps floating around that show California could redistrict every single one of their Republicans out and keep them in a Harris plus 14 seats. So this is more than a Texas fight. This is a national Democratic fight, and Democrats across the country all need to get engaged in this.
Oh, you just told me something I didn't know about California. Congresswoman, if this map passes, the one in Texas, it will most likely be challenged in court. Do you have any faith that that will do anything now that Donald Trump has reshaped the judiciary?
Well, there's no doubt that this map clearly is a violation of the Voting Rights Act. It absolutely marginalizes, disenfranchises all people of color and voters of color and communities of interest. There's absolutely no doubt that this map is unconstitutional. I mean, I've been practicing law for 33 years, and in my opinion, this is a blatant racist map. And so the question is whether or not the judiciary is going to intervene and protect our democracy. We've seen certain judges do so. It wouldn't surprise me at all if an immediate judge declared this an injunction and declared this map unenforceable, but we'll see what happens to the appellate process. You know, there's a lot of speculation about the Supreme Court. They're taking up some Voting Rights Act cases to see if they're going to uphold the Voting Rights Act or not. And so this will be a classic test for that.
You mentioned California earlier. Democrats in New York are trying to pass legislation that would allow them to do midterm congressional map changes as well. Do you think that's an appropriate response? I think I know the answer given what you just said about California.
Well, absolutely. You know, I mean, at the end of the day, we all need to play by the same rules. And so if we're going to do partisan gerrymandering, then we all need to do partisan gerrymandering. Democrats can't have fair, independent redistricting committees basically handcuffed in the national political scheme when Republican states are doing extreme partisan gerrymandering. So I personally favor a nationwide independent redistricting commission to do fair maps across the country. But if we're not going to do that, if Republicans are going to do racist partisan gerrymandering, Democrats need to gerrymander their states too. Level the playing field, play by the same rules.
Congresswoman Julie Johnson, thank you very much for coming to The Last Word.
My pleasure. Thanks for having me.
And coming up, Mike Johnson sent Republicans home so they wouldn't have to face Epstein votes. But at home, they're facing voter anger about the cuts to health care. That's next.
There are more than 18 million Americans over the age of 65. Most of them have low income. Most of them are threatened by illness and medical expenses that they cannot afford. And through this new law, Mr. President, every citizen will be able in his productive years when he's earning to insure himself against the ravages of illness in his old age.
60 years ago today, President Lyndon B. Johnson, with former President Harry Truman at his side, signed Medicare and Medicaid into law as amendments to FDR's landmark Social Security Act. Two programs that reshaped American life by giving millions of seniors, low-income families, and people with disabilities access to health care. But this anniversary comes just weeks after Republicans enacted the largest cuts to Medicaid and federal health care coverage in U.S. history. Today, 135 million Americans are enrolled in either Medicare, Medicaid, or the Children's Health Insurance Program, with more than 12 million people enrolled in two or more programs. Now, more than 17 million people face losing coverage, all thanks to Republican policy changes in the budget bill Donald Trump signed into law on July 4th. It's no exaggeration to say that for many low-income Americans, this is a matter of life and death. The New York Times reports, quote, "The expansion of Medicaid has saved more than 27,000 lives since 2010, according to the most definitive study yet on the program's health effects. Poor adults who gained Medicaid coverage after the Affordable Care Act expanded access were 21% less likely to die during a given year than those not enrolled," the research shows. By analyzing federal records on 37 million Americans, two economists found that deaths fell not only among older enrollees, but also among those in their 20s and 30s, a group often assumed to have few medical needs, and who would have been far less likely to qualify for Medicaid before the expansion. Republicans are dismantling critical safety net programs, putting the health and lives of millions at risk, the devastating result of a rollback decades in the making. In a phone call with his vice president, Hubert Humphrey, President Johnson didn't hesitate when it came to health care.
I'll spend the goddamn money. I may cut back some tanks, but not on health.
And with the Republican-led House in recess to avoid votes on Epstein, Democrats are already out holding town halls and talking to voters about what the Republican cuts will do to their communities. Joining us now, Democratic Congressman Glenn Ivey of Maryland. He held a town hall today to address the impact Donald Trump's Medicaid cuts could have on his district. Congressman Ivey, great to see you. Thanks for coming to the last word. You said that your town hall today was, quote, more than a policy discussion, it was a wake-up call. What did you hear from your constituents today?
A great deal of concern. I think there's a lot of confusion as well and uncertainty about what the impact of this is going to be. And because the bill is so extensive, they don't know necessarily all of the ramifications that are out there. And our healthcare industry is enormously complicated. So there's a lot of question marks. But the bottom line, as you pointed out, is that millions of Americans are going to be losing access to healthcare based on these changes. It's almost $1 trillion in cuts to health Medicaid across the country. And it's, we're going to see what the impact of that's going to be. The other complicating factor, of course, is that the Republicans are trying to phase this in so that the big impacts come after the midterm elections. It's going to be critical for Democrats to make sure we keep telling people in advance about what's coming so that we can use that as a chance to push them to give us a chance to cut the cuts that are going to be making.
Daniel Dawes, an expert on global health policy at Meharry Medical College, told The Guardian that Medicare and Medicaid led to, and I'm quoting here, not only to desegregating, but elevating life expectancy across the states and reducing disparities among racial and ethnic minorities, women, children, and older adults, and people with disabilities. Congressman, can you discuss the impact the Republican budget bill could have on the most vulnerable in our country?
Yeah, as we heard today from some of the people in our healthcare community in Prince George's County and across the state, they're going to have to cut back on services. There may be some shutdowns as things move forward. There might be facilities that get closed in part or entirely. We're going to have tougher, it's going to take more to get doctors and nurses in, depending on how much of their revenue streams come through Medicaid payments. So it's going to have a bad ripple effect for sure. And our state isn't able to fill all the gaps. Neither is our county. So the House Republicans and the Trump administration are pushing a lot of these costs down to the states, but we don't have the resources to fill those gaps entirely. And they're all doing it to make sure they can transfer the money from the needy to the greedy for these big tax cuts, the $1 trillion in tax cuts that they want to put through.
What new barriers to enrollment or treatment could this budget create for low-income patients?
Well, a big piece of it appears to be the paperwork issues. So there, the work requirements, the so-called work requirements are going to be there. And one of the things we talked about today was how challenging that can be for people to keep up with, especially if you're doing it on a recurring basis. I think it's going to be every 6 months here. And the experience in some states like Arkansas and Georgia, I think were two examples that were discussed, have been, a lot of people just lose their health care because they just don't keep up with, the administrative requirements. So that's a big challenge that we're going to have to try and make sure we can correct and prevent with whether it's outreach or healthcare fairs or the like, to try and help people keep up with the paperwork. If they need access to electronic filing capability, whatever it is, we need to try and make sure that we can help them, overcome those hurdles.
Congressman Glenn Ivey of Maryland, thank you very much for coming to The Last Word.
Thanks for having me.
And joining us now is congressional historian Norm Ornstein. He is an emeritus scholar at the American Enterprise Institute. Norm, what was life like in America for the elderly and poor before Medicaid and Medicare?
Jonathan, it was a hellscape for people. There was no coverage for large numbers of people, elderly, disabled, and poor. And while the healthcare system was nowhere near as robust in general as it is now, they were left really helpless. And keep in mind as well that as people got older, they faced problems that might mean they couldn't live independently. They weren't able to go to nursing homes. They couldn't afford them. They either had to go out on the street or to live with children or grandchildren. And it wasn't just the elderly who were protected by these programs. Medicaid, the single largest component is nursing homes. It freed up children and grandchildren from that burden as well. So this was transformative. Both of these programs 60 years ago, Jonathan. And one thing I'll say, life expectancy is 10 years higher now since these programs were enacted. It isn't just Medicare and Medicaid, of course. It's other advances in medical research that the Republicans are eviscerating as well. But there's no doubt that people are living longer and better as a result of these programs, and now they're under siege.
President Johnson stressed to his press secretary, Bill Moyers, the need for Medicare to be defended in Congress, saying, quote, "We've just got to say that, by God, you can't treat grandma this way. She's entitled, and we promised it to her." Norm, is that messaging around Medicare missing from today's healthcare debates?
It certainly is. And, one of the things that's important here, and that I wrote about just a couple of weeks ago in the New Republic, we talk about Medicaid. Glenn Ivey was talking about the Medicaid cuts, and you were as well. But little noticed here is that because the great, big, beautiful, one big, beautiful, horrible bill actually adds $3 trillion or more to deficits, there is a pay-as-you-go provision that's going to require automatic cuts of $533 billion from Medicare. And those are not necessarily put off until after the midterm elections. Unless they're reversed, it's 4% of Medicare being cut. And that means that not just seniors, disabled people, poor people, including many who are what we call dual users, dual beneficiaries, are going to be suffering even more. And we have to remember, Jonathan, that we have an odd healthcare system. It's a hybrid. We have private insurers, we have these public programs. They're all interrelated. When one program gets cut, it has a ripple effect, a domino effect on the others. We had a hospital that closed in Atlanta because they couldn't afford to stay open. Every other hospital suddenly found that their emergency rooms were overwhelmed and their services were delayed or denied. So all of these cuts are going to have a huge effect and reverse some of the things. Lyndon Johnson, a bipartisan majority in Congress, a very different Republican Party back then, even though half were opposed, supported these programs. They're wildly popular. These cuts are mindless, foolish, and they're going to have a terrible impact on lots of Americans.
Norm Ornstein, thank you very much for coming to The Last Word.
Thank you.
And coming up, Medicaid is already shaping up to be a critical issue in the midterms. Up next, we'll talk to a candidate running against a Republican who voted for Medicaid cuts, despite the fact that nearly a third of his constituents rely on Medicaid. That's next. Nearly a third of the residents of Arizona's 2nd Congressional District rely on Medicaid, and on July 3rd, their own congressman, Republican Congressman Eli Crane, voted to cut Medicaid for the more than 270,000 he represents. The Copper Courier reports, quote, 2 counties Congressman Crane represents, Apache County and Navajo County, have among the highest county-level share of seniors on Medicaid in the U.S., meaning they could be hit particularly hard by the bill's cuts. The cuts to Medicaid could also have devastating effects on rural hospitals, which often depend on Medicaid funding to continue operations. Now, former Navajo Nation President Jonathan Nez is launching a campaign to unseat Congressman Crane.
We must act now to make life more affordable for our families. Too many people in our district are making impossible choices between filling up the gas tank or buying groceries, between paying the rent or taking a sick child to a doctor. I'm running because I believe we can build a better path forward together. Are you ready?
Joining us now is Jonathan Nez, Democratic candidate for Arizona's 2nd Congressional District. Namesake, what are you hearing from voters in your district when it comes to their biggest concerns heading into this election?
Jonathan, thank you for having me on this show. You know, one of the primary thoughts out there in our district is the cuts to Medicaid, the possible closures of rural hospitals, and 3 of those, as you mentioned, are right in this district. And, you know, I grew up in this district. I was born in this district, grew up in this district, and I'm still here, unlike my opponent who doesn't even live in this district. And, you know, we need a congressman that actually knows the issues and that's going to fight for the working class people, not just in Arizona, but all across the country.
What does Congressman Crane's vote to cut Medicaid signal to people of this district?
That he doesn't know the issues here. As I mentioned, he doesn't live in the district, and we need somebody that knows what's important to the working people in this district. You know, in this district, it's 60% of the state of Arizona. Out of the 22 tribes, 14 are in this district. And not just in the big ugly bill that's affecting us right now, all those policies for the past 6-7 months now is hurting our district. And, you know, I want everybody to know that I am going to be fighting for the working class throughout this country and the state of Arizona. Come join me, join our campaign, jonathannez.com. Let's take back our country and let's make sure that people deserve and get the help needed. I know there's people that are struggling right now, and we should be helping them.
Mr. Ned, what's at Nez? I'm sorry, Mr. Nez. What's at stake for tribal and rural communities in this election?
Well, one thing, we already have 2 of our radio stations in the tribal community that are going to be losing funding because of these DOGE cuts. And my opponent has voted for that. You know, they utilize these radio stations to get information, especially emergency information out to the community in their own language. And that's devastating. And we're going to see more of these disastrous actions by our congressmen. And, you know, I am there with the community members in feeling the impact, you know, all the way to the grocery stores, to the gas. And, you know, we just need someone that will fight for our constituents here in Congressional District 2.
Jonathan Nez, Democratic candidate for Arizona's 2nd Congressional District. Thank you for coming to The Last Word. Good luck on the campaign trail.
All right. Thank you, John. Let's warrior up.
And we'll be right back. That is tonight's Last Word.